Hello, I'm Carolus, and I was one of the first Western volunteers in Ukraine. Let me tell you a story about those days. The situation in early 2015 was bleak for the Ukrainian forces. Despite the ceasefire deal having been signed in Minsk in September of 2014, on the 21st of January, the Ukrainian defenders at Donetsk airport were finally defeated after months of continuous Russian assaults. Only days later, the Russians shelled Mariupol as a prelude to an assault on the city. The Battle of Debaltseve was just beginning, where the Russians were eagerly pushing against the cauldron of Ukrainian defenders caught therein. The Ukrainians were not only alone, but by the West forced rules of engagement, they were fighting with one hand tied behind their back, trying to uphold a ceasefire which the Russians had never respected. The West forced Ukraine to only return fire in self defense, while the Russians did as they pleased, without any concern or punishment. The Azov Regiment defending Mariupol could not only see the writing on the wall, they were one of the few units able and careless enough about Western opinions to take matters into their own hands. To do what needed to be done, they decided not to care and strike back anyway. They would attempt to push the Russians away from Mariupol, to create a standoff distance against further and coming Russian attacks on the city. It was to be the last Ukrainian offensive during that now overshadowed part of the war. And I, as one of the few Western volunteers in the regiment, would find myself taking part in it. We began on the 10th of February 2015. Us foreigners were tasked with clearing out the small village of Orlivske, then moved on to aid with the capture of Pavlopil. The then company commander Kirt would lead his men to capture the strategic village of Shyrokyne, while our group would hunt for Russian recon units outside of Lebedinsky in the darkness of night. It wasn't long, however, before the Russians responded. The Russians counterattacked, Långström, our squad leader, exclaimed in excitement. They've already taken back a lot of what they lost yesterday. Get your shit together, fast. We will have work to do soon enough, for sure. Ha! We hastily began preparing ourselves and our equipment without really knowing what for. Långström was hurriedly heading out toward the command room in the next building, excited and hoping to grab a good mission. We have to be quick about this now, otherwise all the cool missions will be handed to others, and we will end up guarding some smelly block post or whatever the fuck leftovers remain. Kominternove was a small village in the center of the area of operations. Insignificant as it was, with no real defensive properties for any side, it still remained a spot on one of the central roads leading into Mariupol from the east. During its recapture by the Russians, it turned out that the Ukrainians in their retreat had left an entire 13-ton Kras truck full of ammunition to be captured by the Russians as well. Thousands of kilograms of ammunition left on its bed. Long story short, our commander, Långström, asked if our squad of mainly Western volunteers, the foreigner group, could infiltrate enemy lines and go blow it up. Azov headquarters said no. Långström said okay, and then decided not to care about orders and do it anyway. Hey, Swampy! How much explosives do we have? Swampy looked up at him, surprised. Explosives, mate? Why do you ask? We have a lot, buddy. Great, get some ready because I am going to need a big explosion. A big explosion? Like how big? Swampy asked again, surprised. A really fucking big one. We are going to blow up an ammo truck, man. I grabbed Långström. What do we need explosives for? I thought we were just doing recon. What the fuck is going on? Longström took off his ugly balaclava, revealing his crazy brown hair pointing in all directions, defying any sorts of military hairstyle regulations. Don't you get it? We need the explosives to blow up the ammo trucks the Ukrainians left behind. I was confused, but they said we weren't allowed to do that, didn't they? Longström finally turned his face up at me again, meeting my confused-looking eyes with a swifty look in his own and a sly, ever-increasing grin below them. Yeah, sure, but if they don't know we're doing it anyway, do you really think it bothers them? This is going to be awesome, man! The idea of Longström's wasn't so much because of the amount of ammunition about to fall into enemy hands. The so-called separatist rebels we were fighting were by all means Russians and was supplied by the Kremlin. They had plenty of most. A truckload stolen from our own meager supplies made little difference to them, really. No, the main reason was that this was dangerous. It was a mission nobody in their right mind would even pleasure the thought to conduct, and that was his game. Longström was something of an enigma, a person you rarely come by. A Finnish coastal jäger like myself from the start, then more of a freelance fighter for wars wherever he could find them. Astonishingly intelligent with an IQ well over 160, he could have done anything with his life. He could have been an architect, a scientist, a banker, whatever, and he would have excelled at it. But his intelligence had made him, I think at least, hate his fellow man rather than wanting to work with him, or even worse, for him. So instead he sought only the thrill of war, where he got the chance to fight his fellow man in deadly combat instead, so as to, I think, really show man that he was the better one of them. Any man in any situation, the worse starting point for Longström, the more the main point proven. Going straight into a village recently occupied by the Russians to blow up their prize under their noses, that was the most dangerous venture available for him at the moment, and we would be brought to follow him into this. Longström smiled with great content and pointed towards the others. Richter, you're my radio guy. Quicks, check. You two empty your backpacks and load up the explosives in them. Longström's gaze then fell upon me. Carolus, you'll come with us as fire support. Do you want to bring your RPK or a PKM? I arranged for us to borrow one for tonight in case you want it. The choice was easy. If we were going into the middle of an enemy-occupied village to stir up trouble, and something went wrong, we would need a lot more firepower than 45-round stick mags to shoot ourselves out of it. Get me the PKM. The plan was set in motion, simple as it was. We would have transport by Azov, recon and sabotage guys, too close to Kominternove, sneak inside, blow up the target, exfil by speed and then be picked up by our Azov guys again. As far as the officers knew, we were going on regular recon missions. Outside the schoolhouse, our battle taxis were ready. The Ukrainians had dressed warm in scarves and balaclavas over their faces. The engines idled, emitting thick diesel fumes. The headlights illuminated the frozen, cracked mud parking lot through the burning fossil fuels' thick mists. Mariupol's nightscape was lit up by incoming vehicle headlights, streetlights, and glowing billboards along the road, everything flashing as we passed by them. We turned off our own headlights as we arrived at the final checkpoint at the city limits. Shortly after, we continued eastwards through an empty landscape, where the only light was that of the bright moon above. No Man's Land was still controlled only by the ravens. As dark as the sky was, their even darker figures, numbering in the hundreds, contrasted in the skies above us, pitch-black wings and feathers reflecting the white moonlight at their edges. The pickup wheels bounced over the bad roads as ice-cold winds swirled over the flatbed. The sound of diesel engines driven by subpar Eastern European fuel married with that of shaking metal. I enjoyed a sparse moment of music through my MP3 player. Some good retrowave tunes to get in the mood. I double-checked my machine gun to make sure everything was in order once more. "Please help me now," I whispered, addressing my pleas to anyone willing to listen. "Help me do this. Help all of us now." Our squad disembarked by the main road leading into Kominternove, taking our usual road towards where we had conducted recon many times before, but forward beyond it this time. Prior to this, every time we had reached this area, the Russian electronic warfare stations had killed all of our communications. This time, though, it had either been moved away or otherwise shut down. We remained in contact with our QRF and continued forward, clearing out, luckily for us, empty enemy positions, then heading forward into the village. While the area of our usual recon operations were covered in forest and bush, with ease of concealment, the stretch between this place and the village was all open, a road across open field, not so much as a ditch or tall grass to cover our approach. "Follow me," Långström whispered. "Short distances, 3 meters. "Really?" I whispered back. "That's the plan, we just walk straight into it." Långström smiled back at me. "Trust me, it will work." There was no good way to sneak into the village, so Långström decided to not even bother trying. We just walked along the road, keeping close distances between the soldiers, as if we didn't have a care in the world, as if we belonged there. It all worked out just as Långström had planned. Surely the Russians had some guard posts out. They surely saw us, but would they sound the alarm, as we were coming in looking like just another friendly recon squad returning home, waking up their own commanders, sleeping for that, and risk getting into trouble? Långström had gambled that they wouldn't, and they didn't. Once we entered the village, Långström in the lead led us not on a straight path to our target, but all around the village. I didn't know why then, but I could later see that he took us on a detour for at least 2 reasons. While it became a longer walk, it let us slip in through the back door where the Russians expected us even less to show up. Also, should we be compromised, it left our right flank with open fields, not surrounding us with Russians firing from the houses on both sides. And we didn't get far in before we were compromised, about halfway through the village. Not by the Russians, but by the wild dogs barking. Unlike the sleepy Russians, the dogs sensed trouble coming, and they began alarming each other about it. First 1, then 2, then 4, 8, then tens of them, barking loudly through the previously so quiet night. Had the Russians been sleeping through our entry, they were guaranteed to have been awakened by now, most certainly also able to smell trouble coming their way. "Billiards!" Långström hissed at the man behind him, who repeated it backwards until the entire squad had gotten the memo. We ditched our slow pace and started advancing quickly, each man covering until the man behind him moved up and hit him in turn, sending him forward, like balls on a billiard table. We continually picked up the pace until it could be called outright aggressive. We moved between the shadows where we, thanks to the stark contrast from the moonlight, effectively disappeared into the darkness. Nobody said anything, all communications went by hand signals and eye contact, pure feeling and simple routine. Seeing the fighters work their way up the street, I couldn't help but smiling with great content. This is beautiful. This is fucking beautiful. We were a greased up piece of machinery, fast and precise, efficient and flawless. All of our marches and practice runs during the slow days in Ursov and Yurivka had paid off. Everyone knew exactly what he was doing and how he needed to act in relations to the soldiers around him. Everyone was attentive, quick, professional, and above all, part of a perfectly molded chain. A chain I was loving every moment of being a part of. We found our ways to our target and there set up a perimeter of sort. I, as the machine gunner, covered the road east, while the others prepared the great blast. There haven't been any Russians around so far, I thought to myself as I lay down. Maybe they're still asleep. It did not, however, take long until my gaze caught movements in the distance, coming towards us along the main road. Fittats skit ändå, I mumbled to myself, recognizing the silhouettes of two men carrying what appeared to be rifles. They moved slowly at a walking pace and were still far away at around 250 meters or so, but they kept coming closer. Shouting a warning to the others would surely reveal my position, but I couldn't very well get up and go tell them, as it was more important to keep an eye on the suspected enemies to see where they were heading. Carefully, as to not scrape the metal bipod loudly against the ground, I moved my PKM into firing position. They were now less than 100 meters away. I decided that when they came within 50, I would open fire and kill them both. A single burst, traveling from left to right. With about 10 rounds, I expected I could hit both of them with at least one incendiary round each. They should be gone from this earth before falling and hitting it, and blown out lungs cannot provide screams. The sound of gunfire wasn't uncommon at the front, and so long as nobody screamed out in pain, it was still possible it wouldn't attract that much immediate attention. I needed to cut down both men in a single swipe. If one of them got away, the survivor would immediately run back to his friends and tell them exactly from where they were fired upon. The Russians would then be all over us in an instant. In that game of numbers, we wouldn't have much of a chance. I painted an invisible line in the terrain ahead. If they passed it, they would leave this earth. I would annihilate them. I counted their steps as they came ever closer to their demise, mumbling curses at them as the distance between me and them shortened. They crossed the line where I'd told myself I'd gun them down at 50 meters, but I didn't open fire just yet. Okay, you fucks, you get 10 more meters to live. Last chance, assholes. I mumbled as I focused my front sight and now began to slowly squeezing the trigger. Their death sentence was close at hand, and likely ours as well. The Russians walked a few more steps before suddenly turning away from the road, searching refuge in one of the houses to the side. I exhaled all the air from my lungs. Maybe they were two soldiers sent out to examine what the dogs had been barking at and didn't find anything. In that case, I wondered if they ever realized how close they actually came to finding what they were looking for. I heard something behind me. Turning my head, I saw Quicks hurrying towards me. "We are done. We will have big boom soon, now. Come on, we get out of here now." We gathered in an arc around Swampy, holding the fuse and a match in his hands. "Right, mates," he spoke softly. "The moment I light this, we have 60 seconds, and we probably want to be out here by then." Longström got Bear on the radio, calling our taxis to get ready. "We're almost done here. Get ready." "Fire in the hole," Swampy hissed loudly, pulling the head of the match against the matchbox striker strip. The flame ignited brightly with a loud puff as white smoke and the smell of black powder filled the air. Långström pressed the transmit button on his radio. 60 seconds, pick up, now! The night was silent. Our boots hit the firm ground with loud bangs as heavy men with heavy equipment rushed forward. Rifles, ammo belts, and equipment rattled loudly through the cold winter night. We snorted like thrusting horses and sprayed thick white carbon dioxide smoke from our lungs, which was lit up even further by the moonlight. In front of us by the horizon, strong and blinding headlights soon appeared shining right at us. Our brave, death-defying Ukrainian riders were charging right into enemy lines to pick us up, Bear and the others standing firmly on the flatbeds with rifles and heavy machine guns at the ready. The pitch black and white moonlit landscape around was then suddenly, for a moment, lit up in a powerful, fiery yellow color. Like that of a burning golden sun, the colors then changed to a warm orange and further into blood red. A wonderfully beautiful play of colors let itself flow across and cover all the surroundings, but only for a short moment before then blackening out the world more than ever again. The ground then shook as hard as if it itself was made of pure thunder. I stopped running. As I turned around, a huge white pressure wave hit my face as an incredibly loud bang vibrated through my entire body and organs. As the sound of the explosives died out, it was followed by the applause of shattering glass and windows all across the village. Behind us, a huge mushroom cloud of burning chemicals and oxygen rose up from the small square. Darker parts of red fire mended through brighter and more lively flames of yellow. The enormous globe of fire might have only existed for a few seconds, but the heavenly and bewitchingly beautiful view of flame and destruction will always remain vivid in my mind and memory. I now finally understood why we had brought so many explosives with us to blow up a 13-ton truck already loaded with more of the same. I wasn't the only one of us who had halted. We all stood there in the middle of the enemy line, Russians all around us. If all of us, despite being prepared for the explosives, still turned around to find ourselves bewitched by the majestic fireball, wouldn't the abruptly woken up Russians react the same way? Of course they did, though a lot more distraught than us. Our pickups skidded across the road, making sharp turns to point their rears towards us, whereupon we in turn started climbing the flatbeds. The Russians did nothing about neither the cars nor us. He was completely lost in the thunder and lightning, the magical dances of fires in the skies, and the shock it left behind. It would take a few seconds for him to get back into his senses, but those were precious seconds we were taking full advantage of. The car engines screamed, and the smell of burned rubber filled the cold air. A large fire raged where our target had previously been located as we rolled out at quick speed. In seconds, the Russians fired red flares into the air, not only from Kominternove but all across the entire front line. We had made it. We had infiltrated a position in the middle of enemy territory, blown our target up, and got out again. All of it without a single shot having been fired. Sometime later, a Russian propaganda channel on YouTube called the Donbass Rose interviewed people still living in Kominternove. Among them, an old man standing just where the truck had been left, telling about how the separatists and Russians had told everyone it was an artillery strike that night. The old one knew better, though, because unlike the sleepy Russian soldiers, he had seen us. He stood by his claim that some, what he called, Ukrainians had walked into town that night years ago and blown them up. We would return back to base in Mariupol and rest, only for a short while though before our next assignment came in on Friday the 13th. Going through with this raid and having done it, I thought I knew what fear was. I did not. I was about to learn though, when the Battle of Shyrokyne began soon after, on Valentine's Day 2015. If you found this story interesting and want to learn more about the raid in Kominternove, the lead up to it, and what happened afterwards, consider picking up my book on the war, titled The Foreigner Group. Links are in the description below. And thank you for listening.